stop.
Before you study another vowel sound or consonant sound, maybe you actually need to start with breath. Breath is the reason that if you listen to native speakers talk, everything seems to kind of flow together. But what's really happening is the breath is never stopping until the end of a sentence or a thought group. So if you're trying to get that same natural sound for your speech, we're going to try to use our diaphragm more. If you're not sure where your diaphragm is though, let me show you. It's right around there. It's the organ that kind of pushes your lungs up and then relaxes so you can breathe. A lot of people, when they're talking, they're projecting from right here. They're using their lungs. They're not really using that diaphragm too much. See if you can hear a difference between these two sentences. I live in the US. I live in the US. The second one, I'm using my diaphragm more. To start using your diaphragm more, let's do a very basic exercise. I want you to take your hands and put them on your stomach. Take a big breath in and release it. What you should feel is that when you breathe in, your stomach goes out, and then when you exhale, your stomach goes back in. Now, another way you can kind of test this too is if you take your fists, I promise we're not going to fight, and if you put them on your ribs. When I breathe in, I want you to pay attention to what happens to my fists, and then when I breathe out, the same. When we say an entire sentence, what we want to do is we want to slowly feel our ribs closing. If we don't, then that's a sign that we may be using our lungs. I live in the US. Notice it didn't really move there. I live in the US. Notice that time, especially towards the end of the sentence, everything started to close. I live in the US. I live in the US. See if you can hear a difference between these. Go. Go. Leave. Leave. Where? Where? I don't know. I don't know. Whose is this? Whose is this? Where do you live? Where you live? That doesn't sound good. That doesn't sound good. Then,
Noon regularly.
I'm going to tell you a little secret about American English. I said all of those words with the tip of my tongue down. What teachers are often telling you is
that you need to take your tongue and raise it against the top of your mouth or your gum and your tooth meat or your alveolar ridge.
the problem is that sometimes that can cause the sound to get very tense, block the breath, and not allow you to join words together. The solution to this is to actually pronounce D sounds, TH sounds, L sounds, many consonants with the front of your tongue down. The first time I will say it with my tongue high, the second time low. That day, no one's there. No one's there. Rarely visit. Rarely visit. Noon or 3. Noon or 3. Little lucky. Little lucky. Didn't regularly. Didn't regularly. These zoos. These zoos. Now let's try to say these at a more natural pace with our tongue down. That day. No one's there. Rarely visit. Noon or 3. Little lucky. Didn't regularly. These zoos.
Did you wanna grab a bite?
Let's just call it a day. I'll see you guys on Monday.
These sentences you heard are clear, understandable, good English. Would I ever think that these are native speakers? No. Well, why not?
We're just gonna go grab a bite.
Let's just call it a day.
So I think one of the things you'll notice is that the consonants are so strong in the student examples. So how can we weaken the consonants? Well, we actually kind of talked about that in our last video. Then,
Noon regularly.
we mentioned that for a lot of consonants, what you can actually do is pronounce them with the tip of your tongue down against the bottom of your mouth. What this does is it allows more air to pass through your mouth. To give you an example of that, can you say caw with that tip of your tongue down at the end? Caw, caw, call. Here's another strategy too. Let's say that you have a phrase that you know the consonants are strong on. For instance, like grab a bite. Lots of B sounds there, right? So what we can do is remove the consonants. It's like I. Now what we can start doing is adding the rest of the word. It's like I, grab a bite. The goal is to try to get the breath to keep flowing without stopping anywhere. If you still find after that that your consonants are still strong, like grab a bite, what you can try doing is opening your mouth extra wide and don't ever let your lips touch. I grab a bite. Then as you get used to what that sounds like, you can add the consonants back in. It's like I grab a bite, grab a bite, grab a bite.
Grab a bite.
Let's try doing this with our second phrase. Call it a day.
Call it a day.
Let's start off with the vowels. It's like a. Call it a day. Call it a day. Call it a day. Strategies for linking your words together in American English pronunciation. Similar consonants. This stings. That table. Red door. Words that end on consonants, linking with words that start with vowels. Back off. With are. Cold oven. Using a held sound between consonants. Pop music. That man. Brick wall. Using a fast D or flap T sound. Put off. Rode up. Not often. Weakening or removing a TH sound. And then. Often nan. In the. Making sure not to stop the breath. Red brick oven. Red brick oven. Not that great. Not that great. I didn't know. I didn't know. Left me out. Left me out. Linking vowel sounds with a W sound. Go out. No one. Row away. Linking vowels together with a Y sound. Why is. I am. We are. Listen to these phrases said by native speakers and see if you can find the linking.
You know, I was at his wedding. You know, I was at his wedding.
The new Game of Thrones show and the new Lord of the Rings show. The new Game of Thrones show and the new Lord of the Rings show.
You are consistently successful. You are consistently successful.
How to set work boundaries. How to set work boundaries.
This nightmare that you were a part of. This nightmare that you were a part of.
This. Which of those is rising intonation? Rising intonation is that pattern that you hear that does like this. It has so many functions in American English. Before we get to those more complicated ones though, let's talk about the basics. Rising intonation is firstly used for yes, no questions. Do you live here? Are you studying English? Notice that all of those have that upward movement. Be careful though, because if it is not a yes, no question, then you do not use rising intonation with those normally. This is also a technique that you can use to turn simple sentences into questions. He's tired?
That means that maybe you don't believe it.
Or you're kind of making sure you understood what the person said. You can use the same technique if you're talking about something and you want to clarify or make sure you understood. The appointment's at 4:30. 4:30? You can use rising intonation to show surprise. For instance, if you think everyone's seen a movie and then your friend says that they haven't, you could say,
You haven't seen the movie?
If you have a tag question, which is again used for clarification or to make sure you're going on the plane, right? These sorts of rising intonation patterns indicate that you're not done talking. So even words, for instance, like or often use rising intonation. But even the word in the sentence when you're still thinking can have rising intonation too.
I'm going at 3 o'clock.
The use of rising intonation that students miss the most, though, is that rising intonation is often used to soften or make something sound friendlier. If I'm sick and I'm calling a doctor, when the receptionist answers, they may say something like,
Doctor's office.
It's not necessarily the most welcoming. Instead, if I call a doctor and the receptionist says, doctor's office, that sounds a little bit more inviting, a little friendlier. You do need to be careful with rising intonation because if you use it too much, it can easily become something called uptalk. The last thing that you want to be careful of with intonation is noticing how long it takes to do the rise or the fall. This time difference can indicate different emotions. It is. When combined with pitched, it is. This can be a very effective tool for showing different emotions. So falling intonation is a movement where you start high and you go down.
Like
This.
Fall. And it has a couple of different purposes than rising intonation. So firstly, falling intonation will be used when you're talking about a fact or something that is true. The sky is blue. I have a twin brother. Falling intonation is also used for information questions like what or how or why or who. Who did you call? What's your name? It also commonly appears at the ends of lists. I'll take this, this, and this.
However, it's even possible to use list with all falling intonation too.
I'll take this, this,
This.
Because falling intonation has a more firm or serious tone to it, it's often used for commands.
Please take this.
Don't open the door.
However, it can also be used for expressions that show surprise or joy. That's great news. I'm so excited for you. Falling intonation is also used when you're trying to seek confirmation with like a tag question. It's hot, isn't it? You didn't go, did you? Now comes the real test. Listen to these native speakers.
Feels like you know too much about me. Feels like you know too much about me.
You've hit the goal. You've hit the goal. Totally, totally.
I mean, I hung out with everybody.
Now, one of the things you'll notice with intonation is that there's some pitch involved, right? You start from a low point to a high point, like, really? Or the opposite, really? A piano has 88 keys, but imagine you only used 44 of them. Well, if you are an English learner, you're probably doing that with English. Let's find out though. We're going to take a sound and send it down 5 times. Da, 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 da. Let's see if you can take that back up. Da, 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 da. Let's see if you can take that higher. Da, 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 da. And down 5 times. Da, 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 da. Let's see if you can do that entire chain. Da, 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 da. Let's see if we can now join all of that together. Da. How was that? Did you find it easier to go up or to go down? Let me know in the comments. What we're trying to do is expand the range of pitches that you're using. American English wants to use as much of that range as we can. You can see this, for instance, in exclamations. Try to copy what I do. Wow. Notice we went really high and then ended really low. Wow. How about this? That's great. That's great. No way. No way. Now, there's no way we can cover every single pitch pattern that English will use. We can at least try to go over some common patterns with pitches. Let's try with starting a low pitch and then finishing with a higher pitch. Do you have the keys? Notice there, have the keys. Do you live here? Do you live here? How's the movie? How was the movie? Let's try now doing the opposite, where we start at a higher pitch and finish at a lower pitch. I couldn't go. I couldn't go. Sleep wasn't the issue. Sleep wasn't the issue. Let's now try a 3-pitch range where we'll start at a midpoint, go down, and then finish higher. You don't know? You don't know? There's a leak? There's a leak? Let's now try the opposite of that, where we start low, go high, and then go down. I ate it. I ate it. The girls laughed. The girls laughed. Let's now practice a common pattern used in questions, especially if it's curious or you're trying to make it sound friendly. What you'll see is that it's going to start with a high pitch, then go down, and then finish somewhere a little higher. Could you help me out? Could you help me out? Do you know where this is? Do you know where this is? Have you ever heard of this? Have you ever heard of this?
Educational.
Dictionaries do it.
Educational.
Teachers do it. They think they're being helpful because they break it up really small, really strong with the syllables, like education. People don't talk that way, and it's causing people to have pronunciation that doesn't sound natural. I'm talking about when you're learning a word. The thing that you really want to pay attention to is
Syllable stress.
a syllable is basically a small section of a word, education, that has 4 syllables. However, we're not going to pronounce every syllable the same way. There's going to be a stressed syllable. You need to hold that syllable slightly longer and use a higher pitch. All the other syllables need to be weaker, and they also need to be lower in pitch. So whenever you're learning a new word, I think it's helpful to use a site like Youglish, where you can hear how that word appears in context. Another strategy you can do is remove all the consonant sounds, keep the vowels. So again, if I'm learning education, I'll just do like then I'm going to put the consonants back in. Education. When I'm doing that exercise, I also want to make sure it flows so the breath never stops. If you're doing it like you're going to get a really choppy word like education. 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 Which sounds more natural to you. I didn't know that you were coming. I didn't know that you were coming. These 2 sentences have the same words but mean drastically different things, all because of sentence stress. Sentence stress is the word in a sentence that receives the highest pitch. In general, the way a sentence works is it has small groups called thought groups. These are words that go together. In every thought group, one word is usually going to have heavy emphasis.
I didn't know.
You were coming.
We divided that sentence into 2 thought groups with these 2 stressed parts. Your stressed word needs to have a higher pitch and also be a little longer. The other words, though, need to have a lower pitch and are usually going to be said faster. That part is just as important. I didn't know that you were coming. 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 I didn't know that you were coming.
What's the most general way of saying this?
If you're not sure where to place the stress, you usually want to go on the last major content word. Your content words are nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, things like that. I didn't know that you were coming. That is probably the most neutral sounding sentence that you can use.
Like a young woman I was talking to mentioned this, where
If the kid can come home.
I feel like it's a toss-up.
Bad news, guys. The topic we are going to discuss does not have clear answers.
What do you think?
What do you think?
Did you notice that for that phrase, there are so many different ways of pronouncing it? This is the difficulty with
Reductions in English.
where we have words that don't receive emphasis, and so they become weaker and faster. What I can do is show you some very common variations with reductions that you can use in your own speech. When a vowel sound is reduced, it often becomes either a schwa sound
emblem
or a short I sound. What you're generally going to see happen is when a word or a group of words is reduced, the pitch is going to go down.
What do you want?
This is important because if 2 or 3 words are all reduced together, then you expect the pitch to keep going down. Here are some words that commonly get reduced. To often becomes t, or even just a. Pronouns that have the letter H typically have the H removed. You often just gets reduced to ya.
What do you want?
When a T is followed by a U sound, it often becomes like ch. When a D is followed by a y sound, it often becomes like a j.
Could you?
Oftentimes, the verb to be just gets removed entirely.
You good?
Sometimes groups of 3 or 4 words become only 1 or 2 sounds.
What do you think?
Contractions are very common, even for long negative forms like shouldn't have or couldn't have. Hard consonants like T and D and K and B typically are going to have a held sound. You're not going to hear that t, k, b, p.
It isn't what you think it is.
And you're going to see even more of that with our next topic here.